Hello, this is Paul with us from Intec Systems, and in this video I'm going to give a bit of a deeper dive into RADAAR. So we're starting off on the build analysis page, which is where you'll start off from. For the selection of databases, we're looking at a catalog database on a particular server, so the catalog task needs to be running. Then you specify the server that you want to select a database from. Select the database from the list of applications on that server, and then we're ready to go. If you've just added a database to a server, then you may need to rebuild that database list, which you can do from the buttons here. Then we've got 4 areas of analysis. First off, we need to analyze the database, and this is looking at the database properties and a bit of sizing on it as well. And typically that will run fairly quickly. Then on agents, again, that's also going to run fairly quickly, depending upon the number of agents that you've got in the database. Views and forms will take longer. So views, it'll take longer, as I mentioned in the previous video, because we're not only just getting some information about the view's design, we're also gathering information about the document and view entry collection count, because those may be quite different. So as you can see, this is running through all of those, and it's getting through them fairly quickly because it's running multi-threaded across multiple views at a time. Forms is going to take the longest part because it's not only getting the information about those particular forms, it's also then going through the documents and analyzing all of the fields on those documents, because a form may have just 50 fields on it, for example, but there may be a computed subform there, or there may be fields that are getting set from LotusScript or from server-side JavaScript or Java, and therefore aren't actually on the form. So we need to have an understanding of those if we're going to have an understanding of the architecture of the application. So it's got to go through each document and analyze that information. It's also then gathering the created and last modified date of each of those documents, which is what then gets used on the document analysis. Okay, so let's flip over to one that's already been done. On this overview page, we've got a bit of information about the application. So we've got the ODS version. If this is a database that's been around for a long time and the server's just been upgraded and upgraded and upgraded, then it may be that that ODS version is out of date. That can have a performance impact. We can get an idea here of the number of documents, the number of design documents, indexing settings, and the size of the database and percentage used, which can identify whether it's ripe for compacting. Database properties is rather a bland page, but it basically brings up all of the information from the tabs of the database properties, both in the Notes client and in Domino Designer, and also some information that's not necessarily visible. For example, whether DEOS is enabled and whether it's got the new 16 megabytes summary fields limit that's available with FP8. But we can see, for example, areas that might be worth optimizing. This database is a Notes client only application, and yet we haven't enabled anything to prevent URL open. If it's got URL open, then you may want to force SSL for that particular database. You may want to not allow ICAA. And then further down, then we can see things like whether DAS is allowed, whether soft deletions are enabled on that database, and some of those other settings, which you can then see in a single page as opposed to going across each tab of the database properties. View analysis is a good one to start off with. So you may have views that have a high index count, so you've got lots of resorts. This can often happen when the design is set up and the initial requirement is to be able to resort on absolutely every column. Once a database has been used for a number of years, it may be that that is no longer needed. And cutting those down can actually improve the performance of the application. It can cut down the size of the application as well, because each of those indexes also needs to be stored. Prohibit design refresh. If you're looking at modernizing the application, then and you're looking at working from a template, you need to know what's not going to get updated if you refresh the design. Time-sensitive views. As we start off with development, we may put at today, or at, even worse, at now in a view selection formula, or you may have the last modified date in a column. This can identify those particular views, which could be ripe for a bit of recoding. Manual refresh works fine in a notes client, but on the web, you don't have that refresh icon in order to refresh that view necessarily. So you may want to address that for web or for mobile. Again, private views. When RADAAR is running from Designer local preview, then it only has access to the private views of the ID that it's running as. When it's running on a server and running as that server entity, then it can have access to all of those. And you may have a lot of private views, particularly in an older database, for users that are no longer around. That's going to have an impact. So this can identify those. High differences between the numbers of entries and documents and high document counts in particular views. So these are ones where you may want to look at, okay, what forms are in there? What are the documents there? Let's have a look in comparison with the created and last modified analysis. Can we actually archive a lot of information out of there, which is going to improve the performance of your application. We can see if views are inherited from a particular template, then we can see that information here. We can see ones that are hidden from notes, hidden from web, whether they're categorized or not, whether they're resourceable, the number of indexes, and if the index information is being gathered, then you can get an idea of the index size for particular views. When navigating then down into agents, so agent profiling came in with Domino 7, but you may have views, agents that have just never been profiled. Profiling the agent can give you some useful information on where bottlenecks may be in that agent, or where there may be particular API calls that are taking a long time. I mentioned in the previous video that we're not analyzing code in RADAAR. That's because we're looking at optimization. And optimization of code really comes from code blocks, and that requires an understanding of what that code block is trying to do and whether it can be done differently. Agent profiling can tell you that a document collection.count is bad for performance, or view entry.count also bad for performance, but there may be scenarios where you actually need to do that. RADAAR is a perfect example of that, where we're looking on the view analysis at the high document count and entry versus document. The only way to get that is to do a view entry count. So there may be cases where individual API calls that take a long time just can't be avoided. Again, prohibit design refresh or private agents, which can build up over a period of time with an application as it just gets tweaked for support purposes. Scheduled agents that are disabled. So these may be ones that have been missed from being switched on, or if they're disabled and have never run, then they could be removed from a database just to streamline the design and make it easier for support going forwards. Ones that haven't been run recently or have never been run, again, ripe for streamlining the design. Short duration and exceeded time limits. So the short duration, this is picking up agents that have run in less than 1 second. Now, it may be that those that the code that it's actually running means that that's perfectly acceptable, or it may be that there's an issue with that particular agent bombing out very quickly. Exceeded the time limit. The only way to really see that on an agent by agent, the only way to see that in Designer is to look at that agent by agent, whereas this will give you that overview based upon when the agent profiling, the agent analysis was last run. It will give you that list in a single page. And again, as we drill down into the agents, we can see when they last run. This is on a dev server, so none of them have run, but the duration, the last run date, the triggers, and the targets as well. So it gives a lot of useful information around each agent. The agent schedule summary allows you to then see when those, where the scheduled agents are scheduled to run on, and when they're scheduled to run. And that can be filtered to just show the enabled ones or to show all, and that data can also be exported out to Excel. The form analysis is particularly useful. So if you're looking at modernizing or, God forbid, migrating an application, then the forms that have no documents are of no relevance whatsoever, really. There's no point migrating though that form design out to something else if there are no documents. It may also highlight ones that are no longer in use, or it may highlight print forms, which for a web application may be done in a different way. Forms that have attachments. So this doesn't mean there are 3 attachments in the database. It means there are 3 forms that have attachments. And we can get an idea of how many attachments there are for the particular form. Whether there are readers and authors fields, and whether there are a high number of documents for that particular form. Again, something that may then push up the desire to actually archive off some of those documents. High number of fields. Now, the thresholds for with these high are all set in keywords, so they can be configured. But here we've got a threshold of 100 fields. So we can see that there are 199 distinct fields for that particular form and all documents for that form, but average per document is 85. That average could vary quite significantly if you've got computed forms, for example, and clicking then we can see the list of all the fields on that form. Whether there are any encrypted or signed documents or forms that have encryption or signing. And then in terms of the integrity, replication or save conflicts. So these are forms that have replication or save conflicts. We can see then the number. Response documents, forms that are response documents, and what their parents are. So you could have a particular form that could have multiple parents, as we've got here. You can see instantly what those parents are, so get an understanding of the architecture. Orphaned documents. So here we've got this one form that has one orphan. Again, the numbers here are the number of forms, not the number of documents. So that's something that is going to need to get tidied up if you're looking at migrating, or should be tidied up if you're looking at improving the application. And potential referential integrity issues. So these are looking at fields that look like a unit and trying to find that unit in the same database. Obviously, there may be some cases where a unit is actually going to be pointing to a completely different database. So this is why this is potential referential integrity issues. And this is, again, one of the areas that could be optimized or enhanced in the future in terms of picking up not only units, but other keys, and which databases those keys should be found in for a particular form in a particular database. Again, we're getting a lot of information on each particular form. So whether it's the main document, response document, subforms, the number of computed subforms on that form, the average size of the documents, the number of documents per form, the number of fields as well, and a lot of information of whether they're hidden from notes, hidden from web. The document analysis pretty much does what it says on the tin. It gives you that analysis of documents by their created and last modified date. Created can be useful if you've got documents that were created a long time ago for a particular form, for an import process, for example, and haven't been touched since. Are they up to date? Are they relevant? Is that functionality actually still really needed? Last modified can then start adding some other useful information if it's heavily loaded on the more recent dates, because you may have an agent that's going through and touching all of various forms or documents based upon a particular form and stamping them. Is that going to be required? Is archiving off some of the older created documents then going to improve the performance and improve some of that architecture? Or can the architecture be split out into multiple databases if you're moving to the web? The agent schedule summary, as we saw, it's the same kind of thing as at form level. You can actually find out what agents are left to be scheduled for that day with the console command, but that schedule will typically get built at midnight. So unless you're running that immediately after midnight, then you're not going to get a list of agents that are set to be scheduled. And even then, you're only going to get the ones that are scheduled for that day. We may have ones that are set to run on Sunday or on the first day of the month, for example. So that's not going to get necessarily going to get picked up from the console. It will get picked up from RADAAR. And then you can see just the ones that are enabled or all of them, and see whether there are particular bottlenecks at a particular time or a lot of agents that are set to run at the same time as system processes that would typically get run at 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock in the morning. So that's more of a deep dive into RADAAR as it currently stands. And hopefully there's a lot of information there that's relevant for anyone who's dealing with a Domino application.